About myself, I've been working for Responsability the past 11 years. So, and I started with financial inclusion, but for the past 7 years, dedicated exclusively to ag and food finance. I was head of portfolio for until September last year, and I managed to oversee the disbursements of over 1 billion loans. And manage that portfolio. But since September last year, dedicated exclusively now to launching new products in the overlap between climate and ag and food. So that will be me, Eduardo. And
okay.
You, as moderator, would you like me to go straight to the presentation? Or?
Yeah, please. Actually, why don't we have Path introduce himself, and then we'll.
Thanks.
Presentation.
Yes, good morning. My name is Amat Patterson. So I'm based in Abidjan, and I am the lead environment and climate for West and Central Africa, and also the hub director for coastal countries, country director for Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, and Liberia.
Thank you so much for joining. So sure, Mauricio, if you could spend about 10 minutes going through your presentation, and then we, then we'll have Amat, and then we'll come back to conversation around the topic.
There you go. So hopefully you can see it in full screen now. And yeah, so I because of confidentiality issues, and since this product has not been launched yet, I can only present to you the concept and the lessons learned, and what we can discuss, let's say, in this forum. And very quickly, please, we have just introduction Responsability. We're one of the largest impact asset managers out there. As you can see, 3.5 billion disbursed in 75 countries. Some of our numbers that I would like to pass really quickly. We have 3 investment themes, and this is key to just show that we've been active in climate finance and sustainable food for the over 10 years now. And this product is the overlap of these 2. And this is what I've been working since September 20. And why? It's the IPCC report in 2019 highlighted that the food systems is one of the main contributors to climate change. And that's where we realized that a paradigm has been shifted, that our track record in agriculture had to also evolve. And this is what we have been doing for the past year. We continue to do this, over 1.7 billion deployed in 36 countries, all ag, no financial institutions here. This is just agriculture. But also we have done close to 100 million long-term loans. This is also something that we're showing now to investors, that is not only working capital, coffee, cocoa, what we normally do as a impact investor, but also we have done close to 100 million long-term loans during this time, and with a really good track record, to 2/3 repaid and less than 1% annual losses. So just in general terms, I think this is what we are proud of, and something that we're showing now to investors and saying, well, the sector is difficult, it's emerging markets, it's agriculture, and now if you have climate risk and long term, probably it's difficult to provide the adequate risk returns to institutional investors. At least the perceived risk is high. So by showing track record, you can, of course, mitigate that. Why shifting to the food systems as a concept is that we realized that we needed to innovate, let's say, on how we presented our products. So the value chain is being useful, and we were targeting smallholders. We still continue targeting with our funds smallholders and improving rural livelihoods, and how we link them to markets. But that linear approach, we have realized that probably is now incomplete, because just by productivity alone, probably we will just hit a wall by 2050. We will just continue trying to produce more food, but that is producing also outcomes. So the drivers of population growth and higher income that is driving our pitch, at least to why we need more food and productivity, actually is now incomplete, because that same drive is letting us to also produce undesirable outcomes, which is unhealthy diets, but in our case, waste, food loss and waste, and greenhouse gas emissions. So the food system is contributing to this. And we have came to the conclusion as well that as innovation, we said, why don't we present it also as to investors as a solution? So shifting the paradigm from land use, just land use, to the food systems to way to combat climate change. So this is just big numbers to say that many funds out there, and what we are presenting now is that 12% of the reductions needed by 2050 could come from improving land use. So that's agroforestry, trees, soil. Soil is something new, but many people have focused particularly on trees. That in the national commitments, I mean, the countries are committing to this already. What we're saying is that, we would like to shift the attention also to the food systems. And if we tackled as well food loss and waste in particular, in shifting to healthier diets as part of a mitigation effort on climate change, we could add 26% of what is needed to reduce the GHG emissions by 2050. So that what we say was the innovation, what green financiers are saying, okay, we understand trees, agroforestry funds there. What you're bringing is additional, it's interesting, let's explore that. Scalable, what the numbers, this is not our numbers, there's numbers that everybody knows already, is that this sector is grossly unfunded and there's opportunity to grow. That's why we see more and more people doing plant-based climate solutions, technologies. It really going after the demand created by this conscious shift to more climate finance applies to food and ag. So these big numbers saying that we need 350 billion a year to transform the food systems, but and this will be highly profitable. But only less than 3% of the global volume of climate finance is being allocated to that. So there's a lot of room to increase. What challenges so far we've been facing, and as we speak, we're still fundraising, but we weren't out there early this year, January. So it's only 5 months there, and we have already commitment for the junior tranche. We have commitment for the junior pieces, let's say, the guarantees, and really important appetite for the senior tranches. And we are also looking at notes. So in general, we consider this product within responsibility very successful. We are targeting close end of this year. That's very doable, and probably we will be launching this by the UN in the UN Food Systems Summit in September. But the challenges so far is that we went out there and they were looking at us and say, are you climate or are you agriculture? You're really expanding the subject, and we cannot, for us, climate is agroforestry and solar panels. What is climate beyond that? Also, the portfolio is more complex and diverse, so it has to be global. It's not regional. And also, we come from a coffee, cocoa, working capital. We have experience in long-term financing, but this is clearly expanding our expertise. So we will have to hire people for this. So all those questions were, okay, you come from somewhere, you can show us, but you're clearly going beyond that. The other thing is that we are tackling also early growth companies. That's something that will add to the risk, and we need to target this because they will disrupt, or we need companies that disrupt the system, and also we will do long term. Again, that's risk, agriculture, emerging markets, long term. That's something that particularly private investors will look at. The proposed solutions is we are really offering a balanced portfolio that is mixes of between growth and early growth. So 80-20, that will also improve the risk return with you can charge more to early growth, and also you can participate in the future, let's say, upside. We are tackling, as said, blended structures. This is something that is key. If you can innovate, you can present this paradigm shift, you present additionality, you definitely can have access to blended structures. And this is key, and I would like to highlight a lot. Number 4 is technical assistance and partnerships. This is helping us to de-risk this investment, long-term investments. We will do a lot of pre-investment climate risk and biodiversity risks. And we will be able to incorporate climate change in the growth plans of the companies. So we still need to produce more food, but they will present as projects, and we will be able to incorporate with technical assistance the objectives of the fund. And also we will be able to scale up the innovative solutions of the other investors that they are in the fund. And for that, we have partnered, and this is really key because we're an asset manager, and we have the experience presented, but there are people out there that they really are doing this for a long time. The CGIAR is who we partner with, and they have more than 50 years doing this, 1 billion annual budget in research and applied research, and they are going to be the ones helping us with the technical assistance, and they have supported us in the fund design as well. So this is Eduardo, our let's say our experience so far, and I think I went a bit over 10 minutes, but yeah, happy to go back to the slides.
Yeah, fine. That was excellent. Very, very interesting, very concise. A couple questions popped to my mind, but I'll hold them till later. But very interesting. Thank you. So why don't we go through Pat's presentation, and then we'll come back to a conversation around some of the generalizable questions and comments and things. Go ahead, Pat. Can you share your screen? And
thank you very much. So just give me 1 second. I'll share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So excellent. Very quickly. So I would like just to share also our experience in designing innovative program in IFAD, particularly for the region of West and Central Africa, which I cover. As you know, this region is extremely vulnerable to climate change. Our business in IFAD is environment and sustainable agriculture. We are targeting smallholder farmers, the poorest of the poor. And those are also extremely vulnerable to climate change, environmental degradation, as their business is mostly natural capital. So they use land, water, and they rely on rainfall. So when we think about climate finance environment and try to leverage those additional resources on top of IFAD money, we are really talking about strategic thinking. So to not necessarily do business as usual, like what we already have with IFAD, which is development project, but the climate rational, the paradigm shift which you need to bring when you are going to raise those funds, and also the social inclusion, particularly those different groups. The segment of group, it's the smallholder farmers, but within those smallholder farmers, you have gender, youth, women, indigenous people, and also disabled communities. So the incremental cost which we ask to bring need to be justified. So those funds, they ask you how it is different with what you're already financing, and do not copy and paste a development project for me to finance. So then you need a strategy. Because if you have to go to these different funds, that it's more or less like a capital market, but a green one. There are funds that are out there, not necessarily in IFAD, but you need to compete with many. So compete with the private sector, compete with the other UN agencies, but also other MDPs. And your project need to demonstrate this paradigm shift and innovation for you to get it approved by the board and all the clearance process. So we came up with a strategy first for the region. The most vulnerable area, most needed, migration, conflict, all the things we can imagine. But at the same time, it is also a region of opportunities. Opportunities in agriculture, there are different landscape, different ecosystem where you can grow different commodities. One of the most fastest growing economies also 2019, 2020, all of them are also in the region, despite all those challenges. And this now, as part of the theory of change in our strategy, we need to come up with very innovative project for each fund. So when you go, for example, for these 3 funds, which we are accredited, not all funds, but at least this one, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, the Adaptation Fund. So we are thinking in our back of mind, which kind of project can be really attractive for them and connected to our business, and need to be also like bring that additionality which we are looking for. So the approach in IFAD, which we have particularly in this region, because it's not the same approach in all region, is we blend our money. If we ask the GCF or the adaptation for the GEF, we want to blend it with our resources. So it's more or less like additional co-financing on an existing IFAD project to support climate resilient and low emission agriculture. We know nowadays whatever is being done in the SDGs, we are talking about climate resilient economies and low emission economies. But we are more sectoral, it is agric, so we are doing it in the agric sector with this money. So to do so, you need enablers. So the enabling environment, you need people, and it is a complex, since you need to compete, you need people. So, and specialists. So it's very technical. They don't want you to bring a business as usual project, but a climate project or environmental, depending on the fund. So you need the ESS, environmental and social safeguard specialists, some energy specialists, editors. So the project need to be perfect to get all the clearance possible, and at the same time also you need really to have good contact there, the reviewers, and back and forth because of the time difference, and also the understanding, engaging on a constantly. So here is just a very quick picture of the people who are working with me, or about 7, but we have a bunch of consultant and consultancy firm which we hired that work with us depending on the project. So the road to climate finance or environmental finance is extremely long. It goes from engaging with the countries, what they want, because it has to be owned by the countries, up to the final approval and the implementation. So transforming those resources into results. So particularly in the agri sector with so many approval process. So the different challenge for these funds, obviously, even if there are challenges, so there are solutions, it's really to define what is the incremental cost. So which kind of activity you define as climate as opposed to development activities. So what's the climate rationale behind and what's the vulnerability, the sensitivity, the exposure of those communities, and also all projection for the future, the next 20 years, the historical trend and the future trends. So climate modeling that may affect your investment in agriculture. If you want to grow this crop, maybe it won't be valid anymore in 2-3 years because this ecosystem won't be suitable because of humidity and so on. And therefore, maybe you may not grow any more cocoa here. You may be growing another commodity. So the data consultation, they want everything to be backed up by data, and most of the countries where we are operating, they are low income countries, and sometimes data statistics are not necessarily available. The alignment also of these investment on IFAD. So we may have a project going on, and then you have another cycle of approval from the GCF, the adaptation fund. So there is not like a perfect match, and you need to explain when this project will be approved in IFAD and the other one, so at least you can work together. And the co-financing is also a challenge. So sometimes they ask a kind of a ratio of co-financing. You are asking me $100 million, and how much are you going to put? So, and if you don't have it, you need to find it. So, and the review deadline and time difference. So we're in Africa most of the time. So, these calls are at 6, 5 in the morning, or you respond late because it's also end of the day when they want you really to respond. So these Greek co-financing we are trying to align it from the review process in IFAD, but just to give, the focus on the innovative project, what we did for our pipeline in the region is, first of all, we focus for the Green Climate Fund on simple concept. The first concept we brought and tried to sell to the Green Climate Fund was inclusive green financing with banking. So we believe if you want to bring change, it's not only the ideas, it's money. And that money needs to be green to create the paradigm shift. Whoever will receive the money will comply with your rules and your condition before getting the money. And the good entry point is, financial sector, banks. So banks have money right now, but they are not green in our region. They are not green. The agricultural banks are not at all green. They don't have criteria. If you are able to bring an incentive from the GCF, create scorecards, tools within those banks, help them to transform their investment into green banking, then whoever receives that money from the demand side will be also green. So we start with a little small project of $10 million for Niger with the Agricultural Bank of Niger. It was approved as a SAP, and now we are scaling up. So that has triggered interest from the different countries in the region. All agricultural and national investment banks, these are public development banks. We work with public development banks as opposed to commercial banks. So since those public development banks are like the extension of the government institution and supporting also government policies, agricultural programs and investment on the ground. So right now we are moving to larger program. After this one, the GCF also invited us to bring more countries. So now we move from one country to almost 12 along the Green Great Wall, because they saw that the paradigm shift and the scaling up was really interesting. And in all those countries, we have mapped out national banks, agri banks, where we will be working. And now we move from $110 million to almost half $500 million. So these programs are ongoing in the Green Great Wall area. And we are already having review from the GCF for the first batch, which is set for the board of October, and the second batch early 2022. So another one, so that was more innovative financing, green financing banking system. The second innovation also we had approved 2 months ago by the GCF for $143 million with the African Development Bank, WFP, and ARC, is the Integrated Climate Risk Management Program. So here, the innovation was in the region, in Africa region, we have many projects, but each project work on a set of activities or a set of, either you work on risk preparedness, just installing climate information system, early warning system. So that's your project, but there is no continuity with another project working on adaptation and risk reduction, or there is no connection with another one working on insurance. So in this project, we bring all of them together. So we believe if you have a community, they need first to get the preparation with all investment needed to have this climate, infrastructure. Second, they need also to adapt while you're putting those investment there and the infrastructure. They need to know how to do the adaptation measures. It's maybe like, solar panel for pumping water. How do you do it in a very sustainable way and maintaining the watershed and so on. But at the same time, if there is a big shocks, even if you have preparedness and risk reduction and you're doing well, but you get a big drought and you are not able to recover very quickly, how do you transfer it to the market? And the market, the instrument is agricultural insurance. So where the index, and we combine here micro insurance and macro insurance. So you ensure the smallholder farmers as cooperative, but also you work at the government level to ensure the country with the Africa risk capacity, where government pay premium when there is a shock, they receive a pay. So it was a tough, program because it's different partners, but it brings all type of risk management you may foresee when you are working with smallholder farmers in one program. And now each of the partners will take responsibility on a component during the implementation with different coordination mechanism. So now, if I summarize right now, in our pipeline, we did not go with many projects, we just went with ideas, concept. The green financing now being scaled up with two batches. First one, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Mali, and the second batch. So these are the 12, and from that Senegal to Djibouti, almost $500 million. The second one is the Africa Climate Risk Integrated Program, which was approved, and now we are thinking about scaling up. We had it for 7 countries. It was approved and well appreciated. Why not then? So we are selling concept and innovative concept to the GCF. The adaptation fund was more focused on post-conflict countries. Here we are looking at, if you work on a post-conflict countries, like the case of Sierra Leone, Liberia, or, particularly on strategic commodities, rice and cocoa. So to climate proof them, knowing that these countries in the northern part, it is now getting drier with all problem. How do you do it? So we target a fund, which is an adaptation fund, that provide only $10 million per project, because these countries are post-conflict countries. Sometimes also they don't have the capacity. So you need to be also very pragmatic and realistic. Don't bring 50 million or 70 if they can't absorb. You just bring whatever is, aligned with the capacity of the country. But the idea here was climate resilient cocoa and rice value chain. So that's what we did, and for all of them. So they produce cocoa and rice value chain. We designed one concept for Sierra Leone. It worked. So then we scale it up with Liberia, exactly the same component. It goes from the production techniques to the storage, to the processing, to climate proofing the roads, and all the system to have production up to the market, and what are the different best practices you need to integrate along those value chain to get it climate proof, and reduce post-harvest losses, but also optimize your productivity and yield. So in our pipeline, we have all these ones. So few of them are already approved, 3 out of the 5, and the others are being submitted this year. By end of October, we are already done with the design, but internal review for 60 million. So each of them get 10 million, and the lowest allocation was Cote d'Ivoire. The last fund is the GCF, the GEF, sorry, which is much more small per country, allocation per country, it's 2 million, 5, 7. So our strategy was also to focus on those funds that give more money, like the GCF and the adaptation fund. And for those countries where we can get the best of it, so we go with, but it's more related to sustainable land restoration management, where you can get like unproductive areas, and you transform it to productive area to show to the government that if you do this pilot, tomorrow you can scale it up and make sure that you put your own budget or get another partner, so you can have that scaling up approach. So through these different mechanisms, we've been able to grow our portfolio from, I think, less than 50 million to right now almost 600, pipeline of more than $600 million over the last 3 years. But it's a lot of work, challenges, but you need resources, you need also money, and also internal support to get sometime even politics, where you need to, team up with governments, those beneficiaries, to discuss whenever during the review process you have issues. So I'll stop there, and thanks for your attention. Okay.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. And very impressive how you guys both can get through a lot of material very efficiently and in a very easy to understand way. So appreciate that. So I think you all have framed some really interesting examples with some similarities and some contrasts. So I thought it might be interesting to draw those out a little. So it seems like a little bit, from responsibility, if I understand correctly. I mean, you all are structuring this sort of food system, sort of integrated food systems approach, where you're raising funds. I gather the junior tranche is probably a little more concessional, and then the other part probably more in the commercial market. Is that correct? Whereas it sounds like you all are focusing more on these large sort of facilities that are primarily more public sector oriented in terms of how they're structuring the finance. But one question I have, and whether there's a difference or similarities, when you go to market with these opportunities, how critical, how important, how developed do you have to have a pipeline of concrete opportunities? And how much do these sources of, or are they comfortable with a fairly, what you mentioned, sort of a generic, a sort of an archetype, right? A conceptual framework for cocoa and rice or something like that is good enough? Or do you need to be talking about specific opportunities, identifying the types of the companies or the groups that you're going to be working with? How mature does that pipeline have to be when you go to market? Mauricio, you want to start, or Path, you start first, and then either way. Does that question make sense?
So thank you. Yeah, it does make sense. So thank you very much. In fact, there are several steps when you are going to those markets. There are two windows for the funds which I've been mentioning. So for the case of the GCF, they have various instruments. The first one is the loans. You have the grants, you have equity, you have guarantee. So they have several. Now, we are in a sector which is quite strategic, but we work with a specific client. It's smallholder farmers, the poorest of the poor. And when we are looking for resources outside there, first we look for grants. And grants for capacity building. And grants to show how to do the business first. So second, depending on the type of the project, for example, for the green financing with the banking system, it's grant and loan. Okay. So the loans part, these are line of credit which you put on different banks, and they on lend it to SMEs, cooperative, and so on. So we ask for loan. But the innovation here was loan at 0% interest rate. So we know that in the market in the region, interest rate goes from 7 to 20%. And these smallholder farmers, they don't have access to those ones. So even if you support them, build the capacity and they're excluded from the financial market, obviously there won't be any investment. So we went to those funds and say, you take the risk. We know that these communities are risky, but this is how we would like to work with them. You first bring your money, and it will be an incentive into those banks. Those banks will put their money, and the zero interest rate will cut down the interest rate of the recipient bank, so it became more attractive to those communities, so they can borrow more. Okay. But in response, they will do climate resilient agriculture. But this need to be in a concept note. The concept note first need to be clear by them. If they look at it, they like it, they will ask you at least a minimum number of information. Who are the beneficiaries, which target area, how vulnerable they are. If you put it there and it is clear, it gets into their pipeline. Second, that concept note need to be also validated and put in the pipeline of the national designated authority of those funds to show that it is not IFAD or whoever is coming and sending them a project proposal or a concept note, but it is endorsed by those governments. So there is a letter of endorsement, which is called NOL, no objection letter, and it is a prerequisite with the concept note before you pass the first step. And later on, if it is approved, now you can go to the full design of the proposal with 20 annexes, and each annex goes to one small little details to really like 100 pages of information. So this is more or less just to respond, and it is also the same for the other funds. Over.
Excellent, thank you. Mauricio.
Yes, in this case, this fund is the main goal is to showcase that this can be done commercially. So that's why the structure of the blended finance is to de-risk the senior investors with concessional money that will come, and these donors or foundations and governments, and also green finance funding will help us to prove this. So in general, we are offering capital preservation to the junior tranches. So we'll say we'll not lose your money. We based on our experience, the 100 million that we had disbursed, in our experience, we could deliver this with these commercial terms. So that's why I think the concept is a bit different, and the senior notes, yes, they are more towards private investors.
Right. And in that context, how specific do you have to be in terms of the pipeline, right? Exactly. Illustrating your pipeline to get interest of these investors.
Exactly. So that's I think we need to be very specific. We say we need to disburse this within 3 years, and this is the type of company. This is even the potential rating of the company. So we're saying this between B and double B, and this. So we really need to be very specific with a model portfolio, and so that's it's probably a bit different on that aspect.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And we have again now 30 companies that we are with no names presenting and really modeling, for example, that they're real companies, right?
Excellent. There's a question here from the audience asking how the collaboration with CGIAR is working for the TA risk reduction.
No, it's been working very well. We started working with the CGIAR back in 2020. So actually, that was a slow brewing process, and by now we have a really established, let's say, collaboration, and that took some time to get to know each other because they come from different angles, but we need to really share our common goals. And so I think it's something you slowly brew instead of just jump in, right? But I think now we are, after all this process, it has been working very well.
Excellent. A follow-up, especially for you, Path, which is, since you're asking for grants, a lot of it is grants and or concessional finance. What does success look like? How do you measure success, or how do you pitch that to the sources of finance? Is that something they care about? Do they monitor how you do against those results, et cetera?
Yeah, I think very good question. So, in this GCF document, even from the concept not going to the funding proposal, there is a section of what you need to justify why grant and not a loan and not equity. So the first explanation is we are in Africa, the least developed countries, the poorest of the poor. So on the UNDP Human Development Index, the case of, for example, Niger, when we were submitting the first proposal, this is like I think there is only one country before at the end of the list. So this country, they have like limited fiscal capacities to invest, particularly on this very specific sector, which require a certain technicality and so on. And the argument and the narrative need to be strong and backed up by information. Therefore, they will say, okay, if you ask this, for example, the integrated climate risk management, everything is grants. So it's 82 million. So knowing that they don't necessarily like to give all the money as grant, but you have to be also bold and push. If you can get grant, fine. If it is a loan, it has to be a loan with the lowest interest rate. So the countries have very, narrow fiscal space to pay back. Currently, we have the COVID context, so it's tough for those who used to have their economy only based on export commodities, raw materials. So now borders are closed, restaurants are not open abroad. So they don't necessarily get inflows of funds to reinvest. So therefore, it is justified, particularly if we know that most of these funds have been put in place under the UNFCCC to support developing countries and to support them in building the resilience to climate change, which historically was not created by the recipient countries. Because every time you need to remind them. So it's not like we are going into a business or market, not once, but these funds have a specific meaning, and therefore this is our narrative. But At the same time, also, we don't want always to have this approach of assistance, where you receive only grants and you don't think that it is not to be payback and it's not transformed into result. So we come up with also this project where we say, banking system, it cannot be grant. We are helping you to open a bank account to take a loan. But if you take a loan, let's put it at the lowest one. So at least you get used to taking a loan without necessarily being like tight. And later on, if you are able to grow your business and you are mature enough, you can go by yourself in the capital market. You can even go and take a 20% interest, but it is step by step. For those who are outside the market, we bring you smallholder farmers, you start growing, you are maybe a small SME, and you cannot access to conventional bank, commercial one. This one is for you. So after 4 years, you are able to get a vegetable garden that is producing a lot. You have contract with hotels or whoever, and now you're making profit. So you don't need any more IFAD and the GCF money. You can go and maybe borrow at 4% or 5% from the commercial market. But this is like more or less like the exit strategy and pulling people so they able to process. So each of those instruments, you need to document and say why, and they will then judge how much they will give you about regarding to how strong your arguments are.
Excellent. Mauricio, in your case, what kind of criteria are you using, or sort of outcomes, right? Measurable outcomes that go beyond just the financial, right? As you think, you talked about, obviously you want to be part of the pitch as you're doing certain things that are green oriented. How do you, in theory, there's, you're trying to impact investors are looking at a financial return. Presumably they're looking at some social and environmental returns. Are you using that kind of measurable criteria as you pitch this, and then as you place the money?
Correct. It's key. I mean, the impact framework, the theory of change, and the how you develop the KPIs. It's being key part of the process, and we are borrowing from climate smart agriculture, mitigation, adaptation, and productivity. But since this is beyond agriculture and encompassing also processing, logistics, food brands, and also technologies. For mitigation, we are using GHG emission reductions, net reductions, so that's clear. For adaptation, we are really focusing on water productivity as adaptation. That's something. Why? Let's say one KPI. Well, we will have a battery of indicators. But when we work with the smallholder farmers, for example, we will work with a processor, for example, and that processor will have direct access to 10,000 farmers, and we will work with the 10,000 farmers with technical assistance and support on adaptation, for example, in increasing particularly the participation of carbon in the soil from 2% to 3%, for example. That's really big for adaptation. That will be measured, but we cannot really add if we look then for a logistic solar powered storage solution, for example, that soil is not part of it. So that's why we're really tracking water throughout the food system. That's something we will really be able to offer on a monthly basis to investors, quarterly basis, sorry. And for productivity, we have developed a novel index on food loss and waste. So that is what we will use as productivity. And in theory, of course, if you have less output left behind, you are more productive. And that's something that we can really add throughout the process. And that index is something that we have developed, for example, with the CGRR. And all these three KPIs have the science-based support. So that's also what is it has been key to attract particularly the impact angle and really be able to explain it to investors.
Okay, very interesting. How about you a little more on the, you mentioned very well, your rationale for how you're going out there, but do you actually, do you actually ask in terms of in terms of reporting from the people that are getting the money, in terms of what you're trying to measure? For example, resilience is a nice word, but how do you know that the money's being used in ways that and in order to then eventually learn and adapt and improve, right, and scale and replicate, which is what we're looking at, you need some kind of ability to get feedback from what's actually happening in the field.
Yeah.
In our case, just to complete the pre-investment technical assistance is key. So the assessment, if this is, because we will help smallholder farmers to adapt to climate. So climate risk is big in the pre-TA approach, but how you see if that's really climate change is the issue, and that is something that is part of the assessment at the beginning, the commitment, and really how to measure that actually you're helping to resilience to climate change, not to weather, right, and something variable. And that is something that we are really working with science-based, and yes, that's for that you need TA money and science behind. In our case, right? So for with the smallholders.
Excellent. Matt?
Yeah. So yeah, on our side, I think we are not even designing those, the indicators for impact. It's those funds that oblige you to do it. So there are three KPI which you need to report on when you submit most of them. It is the economic impact, benefit, the social, and the environmental. So for the economic one, you have to demonstrate how many people will be impacted, like direct and indirect beneficiaries. And in terms of well-being, in terms of accessing to resources and change into their daily life, particularly in terms of income. If they were producing 1 ton per hectare, now they move to 5 ton per hectare and they have surplus selling, and you are able to demonstrate that now their salary has changed and the income has changed, then the economic return is tracked. So the second aspect is social. The social one is more like living condition. You may want to talk about gender, the number of women, and in most of our project you need to put a percentage. Is it 50% of the beneficiaries, 40%? But you need to be very specific. And there is a gender action plan which is mandatory, which you have to design and put it into your log frame, that this is how you will address women as opposed to responsibilities, inclusion, being part of the committees, deciding and receiving also resources, and addressing gender inequalities in the area where you are, either it is cultural or institutional, but how will you address it through this project with funding? The same also for youth. If there is a youth gap, how will you do it? So they give you those different indicators, and you need to design a gender action plan, a youth action plan, and integrate it and provide that information. The third one, which is more on the environmental aspect, it is how will you impact on GHG emission reduction from your investment or avoid. So then you can come up with, like my project, this one, we have a tool we work on with FAO, which is the X-Act. It shows you for different crops, different activities you will be implementing throughout the life cycle, you may reduce like 5 million tons CO2 equivalent. And that 5 million tons CO2 equivalent aggregated, it is contributing to that country, CO2 emission reduction. And the national committee can put it as part of what the project is contributing. And when they go to the COP every year, so they can say, so this specific project is helping us. And at the GCF or the Adaptation Fund or any fund, they will also account it as your impact and the impact of the investment of the project. So to monitor on the ground, there is also an annex, which is called the Monitoring and Evaluation Action Plan. So for each activity, you have to tell them who is responsible, how, and the regularity. And it is a long annex with like an Excel file, where you need to put all those information in, plus the different tools which you will be using at the ground level, at the national level, at the regional level, and at IFAD level. We are the accredited entity. The moment we bring in the money, so there are teams recruited to implement the project, but within the team, you have an M&E specialist. And you may also want to collaborate with international organizations that are in that country or regional or national. So they will help you also in collecting information. Like, for example, in some project, we have collaboration with ICRAF and the other partners. That they have tools. They have also like software where they can track, for example, the soil and vegetation coverage and so on, depending on the different investment you are doing, the drones, and provide you some pictures when you cannot access some specific area, particularly in the Sahel, where sometimes you have also insecurity. So you need to demonstrate, show, and then feel that one as strong, and the project will report to us, and we report because we are the accredited, and we are also responsible of the GCF. If there is ineligible or there are ineligible activities, like the project is approved, but the activities are not invested on what was supposed to do. So they were supposed to do. So there is, we call it in IFAD, ineligible activities. So the project is stopped, and that country may even receive a letter from IFAD directly to the Ministry of Economy and Finance, because they're the one signing the agreement with IFAD to reimburse before we continue. So it is strictly monitored. There are also national steering committees that define the work at the beginning of the year before the project implementation units start implementing. So a whole entire system in place to make sure that the money is transformed into impact, but reported. And then there are lesson learned, knowledge managed, and share and disseminated, so we can also move to a scaling up approach. Over.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone in the audience and the participants that would like to ask another question? I haven't seen too many in the chat, but please feel free to make any questions. So it's not we're not totally dominating the conversation, or any observations you can put in the chat. Okay, there's a hand up. Go ahead.
I guess that's my hand. Hi,
Yes.
I'm Andrew Mude, lead SME development and innovative financing at the African Development Bank. Thanks a lot. This has been a great conversation and insights from Mauricio and Amak. I actually have maybe two questions, one for each. I was curious, Mauricio, earlier in your conversation, you indicated that especially as you're trying to resource for the concessionary component, the grant components, the conversation around are you climate or are you agriculture, where that intersection is only meant to or considered to be agroforestry or solar panels. I thought you said, how much of a challenge is this in terms of actually accessing sufficient volumes of resources? And is this do you see this as the debate between climate mitigation and adaptation and the volume of climate finance that should be balanced between that? And should I ask the second question? Or
Let's see if we, Mauricio, why don't you quickly answer that one, and then hopefully we have time for the other one.
Yeah, Andrew, great to see you. Thanks. It's been a challenge because certain, particularly for the junior tranches, they need to tick boxes, and we really needed to explain why is this climate smart beyond post-harvest. And that is where we really spent a lot of time on the theory of change, the paradigm shift, and really developing the report and convincing, because it's some questions like how do you do capex on plantations, because we were really discussing with the climate people, and on the same with the ag, it was how this infrastructure. So I think that's where we really had the major challenge, and we also received the first no's, right? That say no, actually it's not ticking the box. So it has been a challenge, but to be honest, the very large majority understood in the end. So it's a bit of just a back and forth that is part of the process.
Okay, and your other question?
Yeah, thanks, if I may, and thanks for that, Mauricio. I think this is to Pate. I was wondering, and you made the point that a lot of these, I mean, I think you gave the example of Niger, and you mentioned that Niger is one of the poorest countries in the world, and of course, there's a development obligation to support them, and most MDBs, IFAD, AFDB, World Bank will have additional set of resources, different conditions, also donors and so on. But maybe what I'll try to understand from the point of view of the additionality of the climate finance, how do you generate that additional resource that is due to them? Because as you said, you know, they're among the most vulnerable to climate change on top of the other challenges they have, but you know, are not a real provider to that problem.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. So, and very good question. So, you see the additionality, why it is quite simple in our sector is we are working in agriculture. So, in these countries, rain-fed. So, we're not even talking about irrigation. It's 3 months and then it stops. So, when you talk about rain-fed, you are talking about the, you know, the foundation of agriculture. It's the rainfall and you know, temperature, evapotranspiration in those different countries. So the different crops that are being grown there, they are like staple crops, or even if they are like tradable crops. So they depend on the water. Now, after 3 months, what do you do? If there is still like, you know, area where you can, you know, mobilize water, have good practices to produce 2, 3, 4, 5 months additional, you are adapting. So, and if you produce, what is then the processing system? Solar is there 365 during the year. How do you integrate it? For us, it is natural. It is integrated. So you cannot even think about this is just agriculture, but really the fact that where they are, the ecosystem justify 100% the climate rational. Now you need just to show, you know, the data that you know, there is regularity of drought since you know, the last century up to now. It happened every two years or 3 years. You need those data, and they are available, and it may happen again in 2 years. So therefore, we need this money to prepare if there is any shocks or to build the resilience before that shocks. And then that additionality is integrated as part of the portfolio, and then you send it to them. But there has to be scientific with data source and so on with numbers. And you need to work with, you know, research institute as well as with other development partners. Over.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're out of time now. So I believe we're going to be returned to the plenary session. I want to really thank our speakers, Mauricio and Pate. Excellent presentations, but even more important, willingness to drill down into some of the issues and questions that people have, and some of the challenges of really coming up with innovative approaches to green finance. So much appreciated. Thank you.